This is Stephen Copeland, and welcome to Off the Page. Mother Teresa once said to a reporter, quote, "Of all the countries I have been to, the poorest is America, because America suffers most from the poverty of loneliness," end quote. This landscape of loneliness is one that an estimated 4 out of 10 Americans navigate regularly, as a recent study from Pew Research Center highlights. In our culture, it is becoming increasingly difficult to cross the spiritual bridge from loneliness to solitude. Instead, it seems that we frenetically seek to fill the emptiness at all costs, with stuff, with distractions, with ideology even, or other promises of wholeness and completeness. The interview you're about to hear is with someone who has learned to find God, or perhaps better said, be found by God, when that sense of aloneness settles in. Her story is wild, as you'll hear, and it's inspiring. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our next guest on Franciscan Media's Off the Page podcast, Susan St. Sing. Susan St. Sing, Ph.D., is the author of God's Love Song with Father Murray Bodo, which was released this past year. And she's also the author of Francis and the San Damiano Cross, Meditations on Spiritual Transformation. She received her doctorate in sport history and kinesiology from Penn State University, and she is a secular Franciscan. She has been a main speaker at national conferences on St. Clare and on spirituality, and she resides in Stuart, Florida. I'm so thrilled to share this interview with you, and I want to thank Susan for having such an honest conversation about her journey and struggles. It is an honor to present to you my interview with Susan St. Sing, but first, a message from our sponsor. Earning a Master of Theological Studies with a Franciscan theology lens is now possible anywhere in the world. The master's program at the Franciscan School of Theology offers a blend of academic engagement and spiritual reflection. You can learn at your own pace while connecting with fellow students and instructors in a respectful and down-to-earth environment. Embark on a 24-month mutually transformative journey with the world-renowned faculty and instructors from FST. The Master of Theological Studies, Franciscan Theology, is 100% online. You can complete it in 24 months, and it is fully accredited. I actually just completed this program, and it's amazing. So I highly recommend it. To learn more, you can visit theologicalstudies.sandiego.edu. Again, that's theologicalstudies.sandiego.edu. Susan St. Sing, welcome to the Off the Page podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
So I was wondering, you write beautifully and transparently in your book, God's Love Song, a book you did with Father Murray Bodo, a big author here at Franciscan Media, about some vulnerable moments in your life. And I was wondering if we could start this interview at the very beginning of your journey, if you don't mind. What was your childhood like, and when did spirituality enter the picture for you?
Okay. My childhood, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I really didn't care much about God or church. I was much too focused on going skiing or hiking up in the mountains. But it actually, my spirituality, if you will, started up in the mountains, up in the woods. Some of the first things I ever wrote were about being up in the mountains, being by myself, hiking. I just love to be near nature, either mountains or oceans or some kind of water. And but I think the spirituality started when I got probably to be more of a young teenager. I was up one winter night. My parents stopped asking me where I was going because they knew I was out hiking someplace up on the mountain in the snow. And I was sitting up in a field that was cut down. mowed down. I guess I was at the edge of a farmer's field right where the forest starts. And I just sat down, and it was Christmas Eve. Stars were out. It was very clear night, black sky. And there was a woman in our church, Mrs. Ryofsky, who was singing Ave Maria, and I could hear it. I grew up in this little mountain town, basically, where some of my classmates rode their horses to school. That's how rural it was. But I could hear that song drifting through the night sky, and the houses, the lights down below, and smoke coming from chimneys. It was almost a Norman Rockwell painting of some type or something, But that's where something touched me that I wasn't alone. And then I always felt that since then, that there was something, maybe that was the first time I felt the spiritual world, good and bad, dark and light. But I knew the light. I knew I was not alone, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's I appreciate you walking us through that scene. How old were you?
Maybe 14, that era.
Yeah, and what was it about nature that always kind of drew you in?
I don't know, maybe the beauty of it, the solitude, the quietness, particularly any animal sounds, like to just be able to sit by a stream. And like, there was one place in this ravine that I used to hike a lot where you could sit on, it's a very steep, very dangerous place actually to go hiking, but where the water would be below you, but above you, hawks or eagles, because I lived in the mountains, could soar down through these, the wind. And so you were kind of sandwiched in between the fish in the waterfalls below and the birds above, and you were just part of it. Like, I really felt like a creature, like I was one of God's creation. That's the best way I can explain it.
Yeah, and that feeling you talked about of not being alone. Did you feel alone before that, or can you go a little bit deeper into it's such a touching scene. This young girl out on a hike, and something touched you that day. Something ripped your heart that day.
I think I always felt alone as a kid, as a young kid. My family moved a lot. I was always in and out of different schools for different reasons, and I never really had any close friends except my animals, my pets, my dogs, cats, guinea pigs. I felt closest to, I'm not saying my family was weird or anything. My family was very loving family, but I just never felt connected to anything except that one night, anything spiritual, anything other. I mean, I love my brother and, my family, but I never felt that inner peace, if you will. As a kid, I was always awake a lot at night, wondering about things. I was maybe a strange kid. I'd sit at night when my sister would be sleeping and just be looking out the window, wondering. I mean, I'm talking about like a 5-year-old, wondering what was out there in the universe and the stars and the darkness. And I'd leave the house at night, even as a small kid, and go out in the backyard and just sit on the swings and look at the sky. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like you were a Franciscan before you even knew what that word was.
Maybe.
Yeah, when did writing and artistic expression enter the picture for you?
At a very young age, I wanted to play the guitar. I recorded I had a contract with Warner Brothers at one time with Arlo Guthrie, and I started playing the guitar when I was maybe in 5th grade, and wrote songs sang songs. We had a number of cassette albums with Father Murray, with what used to be called St. Anthony Messenger. Now it's Franciscan Media. And I had a record contract, like I said, with Warner Brothers for a while. A couple of my songs, Brother Wind, was recorded, and it was in that Sunday missal that they used to have in churches back in the day. So I started my writing with writing songs. I just played my own songs usually. I don't know how to read music, but oddly enough, I can write music. I don't know why. They're two different gifts, I found out later. But I started to keep a journal when I was maybe 12. I started writing. I still have my earliest writing. It's about from that age.
Yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me, because your writing in God's love song it feels the prose is very lyrical.
No, thank you. Yeah.
And it has a way of, in Father Murray, he's similar in the way he writes. It has a way of taking you in on a sensory level.
Well, when I would write songs, sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and I could just pick up the guitar and an entire song would be there. The chords, the picking, the words, everything. All I had to do was kind of keep up with what I was hearing coming and lay it down on the guitar. And that's the way that my writing has always been. It just comes. And I don't know. The Muse, I think I told you a little bit about that. And then I'm like a scribe. That's the way I don't credit myself really for the inspiration or for what comes out. It's just I'm trying to write down what I heard interiorly. And it's always been like that. And that can be frustrating sometimes for a publisher, because they want an outline, they want this, and it's like, I don't have it yet. Like, it hasn't been given yet, if that makes any sense. I don't want to sound, too esoteric about it or anything like that, but it's just the way it is.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I know in my own work, I've explained it as, it's almost as if a story grips me, and then I'm not stuck in a maze. Like, I'm enjoying, I'm enjoying being lost in the story, and yet I have to write my way out of the story, in order for myself. Like, a lot of it's just for myself. Like, I feel inspired. I feel that sense of not aloneness that you mentioned, and the story has met me where I'm at, and now I have to write my way out of it, and I don't know the way out. Like, I'll figure it out as I write.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a contract to write a few books for St. Martin's Press, and the one was called The Wonder Crew. And I had a timeline on that book, the New York publisher, and I just couldn't it just didn't come. And then one day I was at a stoplight, and all of a sudden the first line came. And so I pulled over into a police department parking lot, and I was grabbing everything in my car, wrapping, Kleenexes, whatever I could find, and start scribbling on it. Once I got that first paragraph, the whole book just came together. I just didn't ever have the first line. So.
Yeah, well, it's you're right. In our age of our BuzzFeed kind of age of, hey, here's the top 12 things, here's the outline, here's the formulaic kind of breakdown of things. The creativity you're describing can be uncomfortable to, say, a marketing team.
Yeah.
However, I think there's something really beautiful about it, because the openness, the fact that you're opening your heart in real time to receiving what the Muse is saying to you, what the Muse is giving to you, it's almost like we don't have the answers. I wish I had the answers. I don't have the answers. I I need something outside of me to communicate the direction, the trajectory of this thing. And I have to be open to it. I have to be open to it so that I can receive it. Any thoughts on that?
I think the openness is a big part of it. I think in our current world, I don't know how it is at your house, but in my world, there's so many distractions. It's hard to find that quiet time. Uh, at least at my age now, it was easy when I was young, obviously, but where you're not distracted with all this inner noise, you know. Um, I once had somebody ask me, because I have to drive to work about an hour each way, and they asked me once, well, what do you listen to? And they, you know, do you listen to music? Do you listen to podcasts? Do you listen to classical music or books on tape? And I said, nothing. I listen to absolutely nothing. The car, I can be, you know, open, quiet. But that inner openness is, I think, also at a spiritual level. You know, there has to be a level of I've found either a level of peace or a level of great upheaval in you. Sometimes when my life is really in a bad place, if you want to think of it that way, a difficult situation, I can sit down and write. You'll see that in some of the writing when I'm up in the middle of the night. And I think I even talked about that in God's Love Song. Then I'm writing them too.
Yeah, no, that's been part of it as well for me, is the emotion, good or bad. Like it can be this, I don't think there's good or bad's a wrong way that's too dualistic of a way to explain it. But the rupture of emotion, whether that's gratitude, like the moment you described as a teenager and you're just in awe, feeling like you're not alone, or the chaos within me, the fear, the insecurity, the future tripping, the, replaying my past mistakes, like all these different things. Like sometimes, frankly, that's the story. And I have to write my way out of that thing, or else it's just going to keep having a hold on me.
Yes, I totally agree with that. It's these intrusive thoughts sometimes at night that you don't want, that I'll get up and start addressing them, or I'll just start writing something that's come to me, the questions of why, and try to answer them on the computer screen. I used to just write longhand. Most of my writing was done longhand, but now it's hard for me to, it's not hard, but it's so time consuming to go transcribe from longhand to the computer. So now I've gotten used to, trained myself, if you will, to just sit at the keyboard. So
Yeah, does that sense of maybe this isn't the correct word, but that feeling of bombardment where all of a sudden you wake up and the thoughts are just running and the discontent or whatever it may be within you, does that happen a lot for you at night, or when does that kind of unfold?
it's almost always at night.
Same.
I was always, even as a child, going back. Uh, I never slept well. I always was awake at, not always, but I don't want to sound, sleep deprived. But I was awake a lot at night, just wondering. Because I think part of that could have been because we moved around. I was in different houses, different noises, different sounds. Wondering where my dad was sometimes because he would work late, and I would just kind of sit at the top of the stairs and listen to the house and just wonder and then I think as you get into your spiritual journey too, I truly believe that the darkness, if you want to call it that, tries to interrupt and interfere and influence your thinking, and you have to sort that out. Um, so.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to say it. You have to sort it out.
Mhm.
And the challenge for me, whenever that sense of bombardment of thoughts or inner turmoil happens in the middle of the night, one, that's always when you're most vulnerable, right? You're asleep. You're doing something that you have to do as a human, and then you wake up and you're like, there it is. There's the darkness again. It's been a challenge for me to try to reframe it and say this is an opportunity for contemplation, for perhaps resting in a different way through prayer, through creativity, like you mentioned, that maybe there's something here that's not all bad. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I'm following what you're saying, but
We get that a lot on this podcast.
sorry. No, I don't think it's all bad. Sometimes, like, whatever the I'm going to go back to the word darkness because that's the only way that like 3 o'clock in the morning for me, you were saying that's when you're the most vulnerable at night. For me, it's 3 a.m. I wake for whatever the reason at 3 a.m. probably 75% of the time in my life. And I don't know, well, I do know why, but that's also now become one of the times when I don't struggle anymore with the inner thoughts. I just get up and I will start to either write, make a cup of tea, or just accept the fact that this is part of the spiritual world. I'm just going to talk a minute. You can edit it out if you want later. But when I was, again, maybe 12, 11 years old, I had a sense one night of something in the room. And when I rolled over to see what it was, I had a pretty startling, I don't want to say a vision because I don't, I'm not a saint or anything like that, but there was a presence in the room. I knew it. I could feel it the same way as I knew that night on that snowy night that I wasn't alone. I also knew I wasn't alone in this evil. There was a darkness in the room. And so I call it unwanted knowledge because I know that that was kind of the moment when I realized everything in the it's all true. Everything in the Bible, all this stuff that we read that sometimes it's hard for us to connect to because it happened so many, the millennia ago, that it's true. There are two worlds and we're called to walk, in the light, and we can be afraid, but there's no harm. I think Saint Teresa said that once.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to that theme of darkness, for the lack of a better term, if you don't mind. You wrote in God's Love Song about a kind of fragile time in your own life where you found yourself wrestling with God in a chapel at Penn State. I found the writing very gripping, and the story very relatable. What was going on at that time in your life, and what did the priest in that church say to you?
Well, if you think of your spiritual life as like rungs on a ladder or something, that was kind of my trying to climb out of some troubled times. My father had died, and I felt really there was a prayer group at Penn State called Bread of Life, and I was walking back from a class one evening, and I saw these people. There was about 40 or 50 college students in there, a couple of Benedictine monks, and they were singing, and they all looked happy. And I stopped and I looked in the window, and I just watched them, and I knew I didn't have whatever they had. I didn't have inside me, and I got angry. I used to go to church a lot in my town in Berwick. Usually when there was no mass or priest or anybody, I'd go in and just kind of walk around the church and pray. as you would as a young, person or something. I didn't really kneel down a lot and pray formal prayers. I was just always kind of wondering, looking at the statues. And so when I saw that, it was so poignant that they were happy and I was unhappy. I was pretty much alone at Penn State. Like I said, my father died. My mother was in a vulnerable position. We were going to lose the house again. I didn't have money. It was awful. I had a scholarship to be in school, but I was sleeping on a mattress that I had gotten out of a dumpster behind a McDonald's, and that kind of college life. It was not easy, and I didn't have my dogs with me. It's a lot of stuff in the background that made me terribly alone. And then when I saw them, like I said, and how happy they were, I went in. There was a small chapel at Penn State. It's a really cool school there because where they built the university was part of the original diocese. And when the diocese gave up the land, they said, we're going to keep this small chapel. You must keep this small Catholic chapel on campus. So there's a small Catholic chapel there it's incredibly precious. It's about the size of San Damiano's in Assisi. And so I went in there. No one could see me. I went in a door in the back of this building, and I just sat down. I started to try to listen to them in the background and argue with God right in front of me. And I just got mad, and I was like, why do you keep me so alone? Why am I so unhappy? Why did they have what they have? And I threw a couple of the missiles on the floor, and I went up to the tabernacle. I didn't hurt it, but I put my hands on the altar. I was basically arguing with the tabernacle, if you want to think of it that way. And but when I threw some of the prayer books on the floor, it was a stone chapel. It made enough noise that somebody heard it, and they told Father Leopold, is the priest who came in. He became the archabbot at the Trobe Arch Abbey, and he became my spiritual director. And I didn't know he was there. And I continued my rant, and as I remember, I think I took one of the candles off and I didn't break it, but I had it in my hand. I was just kind of holding it. And then I laid it down and I turned to leave. That's when he was sitting there. And I had started crying. And as I went to walk out, I just went over and I sat next to him. Father Leopold was a very large guy, maybe 6'3", big, roly-poly Benedictine monk in his black, he had his robes on. And he just held me. And he said, well, he loves you anyway, right? That's what he said. And then he told me to just go home and be quiet and listen. He said, God will answer. And that's all he said. He didn't say a lot, but I think it was the smell of him. He smelled like aftershave and warmth and just totally trustworthy. Could just sit there. I could have just sat there for hours. Of course, we didn't. It was very brief, but it's just those arms around me I'll never forget it. Sitting in that pew and just a few words that he said, and then he got up and left, and I got up and went home. And then I had that experience I think I wrote about in the book too that night. So.
Yeah. Where did your journey go from there, Susan? You talked about Father Leopold became your spiritual director. How did this continued wrestling unfold? And then what guidance was he able to give you as you navigated this really vulnerable time at a young age too? I mean, to lose your father as an undergrad, correct?
Right.
I mean, that's a lot. Yeah.
He got sick when I was in high school. And Well, I went home that night. Remember, he told me to go home and just sit quietly and God will answer. Well, that didn't help a lot, but I did go home and I got up and I waited. I just sat at the table in my apartment and I again went into a bit of a rant and I said, okay, Lord God, I'm here. You want to say anything to me? I was really pretty outspoken, you know. If you have anything to say to me, I'll sit here one night. If you don't talk to me tonight, then it's okay. I'm out, being not very respectful. But that's how I felt. It was like, I'm here. You got one night, say something. If not, I'm not listening. Because I was in a lot of pain interiorly. There's some other things to the story, but so I sat there, and then I sat there a long time, a couple of hours, just sitting, waiting, and around, I don't know, 2:30 in the morning, that all of a sudden I was on the floor, and that one brick wall in my apartment just opened like it wasn't there. And I could see all these colors of purple and gold. Like I could see into the universe. It was immense. It was just immense. And the holiness, it was so holy. I couldn't get off the floor. I tried, but I had to remain prostrate on the floor. I was face down, but I was completely immersed in whatever this magnificent light, purple and gold, and out into the darkness, into like a million stars. And the only word that came to me was Abba. And I didn't know what that word meant. And then it was gone. And, but I knew that I was different. I just knew everything changed. The whole world to me changed. It was like, so the next morning I went up to the Catholic offices and I found Father Leopold and I told him a little bit. I didn't, I said, I don't know what this word means. I heard this word and I don't know what it means. And so I told him I said, I didn't even pronounce it right at first. And so then he told me to go down to this bookstore and buy a Bible and look it up. I'm sorry, I don't remember the passage. It's in Romans, I believe.
Mm.
And that's where that you're a child of God. So
Yeah, it's yeah, and does Abba mean father as well?
Father.
That's very interesting that at this very dark time in your life where you're grappling with the loss of your father, this person who raised you and loved you, that's the word that comes to you in this mystical experience in your apartment.
Yeah. And I had a very close relationship with someone, and that had been lost at the same time when I went to school. A person that I thought I would be married to forever or be with the rest of my life, that happened at the same time. There were a number of things, like I said, personally, that were happening, and that added to that level of anger, I think, at my own life, that I was so young and everything was such a disaster already. Didn't see how I was ever going to get out of it because I was pretty much alone. And then all of a sudden there was this presence. And then, so Father Leopold stayed as my spiritual director from then on. And he told me to come to those prayer meetings, if you want to call them that, with Bread of Life. And then I moved into one of their households on campus. And it was a great group of, I'm still in contact with many of them. And we're a pretty tight group yet. And that's how I met Father Murray.
Mm.
I always knew who St. Francis was, just from church. I mean, I heard his name, but it wasn't like I really knew that much about him. And in our households, we lived male and female because we were all just college kids, and some of us were in houses with 5 or 6 bedrooms, and we all shared kitchens. And, it was very much the 70s kind of feel, Woodstock and all that stuff, But one of the guys in our house, he just recently died of cancer. He was in the room next to my room. Like I said, I was usually restless at night, or I'd play the guitar, and he's trying to do his master's work in botany, and I was keeping him awake. And so he came into the doorway of my room, and he had a book in his hand called Francis, The Journey and the Dream, right? And he was way ahead of me on the spiritual, trail. He was very deep into different saints and stuff. And he said, "You're driving me crazy. You're always singing in the middle of the night, and I can't do my work, or you're up walking around." He said, "You need to talk to somebody." And he said, "So here, talk to this guy." And on the back of Father Murray's first edition of that book, he's holding a pipe, and he's clean shaven, and he had like black glasses, and he still had hair at that moment. Sorry, Murray, but and John said, "Here, talk to him. He has a nice face. Talk to him." And so I did, and I read The Journey and the Dream, and that was it. I just that's where I first got into St. Francis, and then probably within just a few weeks of all of that, I fell in gymnastics at Penn State, and I broke my neck and back, which didn't help matters. But I knew when that happened too. I told the doctors, because I was spent 10 years in a pain control center during that whole journey, but I couldn't graduate from Penn State in my major. I lost my graduate scholarship to go to grad school because I couldn't write. I was partially paralyzed. I don't want to over dramatize that. It was neuralgia in my hand, in my right arm, right upper quadrant. Wasn't probably like someone would think who's in a wheelchair and have some kind of severe paralysis. Mine was mainly pain oriented, and it was nerve oriented too, but it was more weakness than. But anyway, I just decided the only person that would possibly understand or could explain all this to me was St. Francis. I had to go talk to him. And I just told Father Leopold that I was going to Assisi. And he just said, "Well, if you think that that's what you have to do," he said, "then go." And so that's what I did. I had $100 in my pocket. Stupid college American kid thinking $100 in Europe is going to last me, the whole summer. Of course, it didn't eat me the first day, but so I went to Assisi, and it was a long, interesting train ride all through. Just even when I first landed, do you want to hear all this, or is it
Absolutely?
Okay?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. This is great.
Well, I took Air Icelandic because that was the cheapest airline at the time, and I landed in Belgium. No, Luxembourg. It landed in Luxembourg. And as soon as I got off the plane, I realized I'm in trouble because there was a hotel there, but it was $60 for the night, and I only had $100 for 3 months. I was going to be gone all summer. And so I picked up the phone, and I had a charismatic renewal listing of prayer communities around the world. And there was one in Iceland, or in Luxembourg City. So I called on the phone, and it said Father Smith, because it was printed in English, I wasn't thinking. So I asked for Father Smith, and they hung up. And I also didn't have a lot of change to be using these foreign payphones. So I tried it again, and they hung up again. And then it dawned on me, oh, they probably don't understand English. And my parents or my grandparents were German on the one side, so I knew a little bit of German. So I just, said, Herr Schmidt, bitte, in the best German I could muster. And then they said, Ein Moment, something like that. And then he comes on the phone and I said, Father, I hope you speak English because I've just exhausted my German. And he said that he did. So he picked me up from the airport. I told him I was a college student and trying to get to Assisi. Took me to one of his parishioners' houses to stay for the night, picked me up the next morning, put me on the proper train, all of which I had no idea how to do any of it, and had the train going down through the Alps and all of this. It was another just rainy, dark night on a train with a woman sitting across from me in this little. We had a room, not like a roomette, but like two benches facing one another. And she didn't like me. It was clear that she didn't want me to go in there, but I didn't want to be anyplace else on the train because I didn't know anybody. I didn't know the language. I couldn't understand the announcements. They were all in like Swiss and French, and I knew I was kind of in trouble here. But then she fell asleep during the night, and it was cold and it was raining. The train window was full of raindrops just streaming down the window, and she had a little shawl over her leg. It fell on the floor, and so I picked it up and I just lightly tried to put it back over her, and of course she jumped and it woke her up. But when she realized what I was doing, that seemed to break the ice. And then she opened up this satchel she had of bread and cheese and all kinds of stuff. And then she became very friendly, and that eased the moment a lot, because I still had I had a cast on and my arm was in a sling.
Mm.
So then she read the tickets because I kept hearing these announcements, and I would look at the tickets and I'd just shake my head. So then she took the tickets and she read them, and she got a conductor to come who spoke English, and they were talking to themselves. Anyway, I ended up getting to Milan, going through the Alps at night, which was really cool. And then I was in Milan, and that train station I had to wait. And it was very dangerous train station, as I found out. I didn't know it ahead of time, but I sat with my back against the wall, big open, like a World War II train station, probably 20 tracks, a lot of strange people walking around, dark. And I just kept all I had was a little, because I couldn't carry a backpack or a suitcase. I had just a little fanny pack for the whole summer. And I just sat there, and this guy came up to me and he started speaking to me. He said, "You're an American, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." But I was wearing a Canadian flag on my backpack, on my little fanny pack. And because my father was Canadian. And he said, you can't sit here. He said, "This is way too dangerous." So then he took me to my train, and he talked to a conductor, and they let me sit on the train for the last couple of hours. And he sat across, they opened two doors across the train aisle, and he sat in the other. So he wasn't threatening. He kept his distance. And then he told me that he had studied in Chicago, and he was Italian. And I told him where I was going. So then he made sure when the train started, he got off because he wasn't going to Assisi, but he explained it to the next conductor where I was going. And when I finally got to Santa Maria degli Angeli, which is at the base of where Assisi is, like 4 or 5 people by this time got the story that this American college student doesn't know what she's doing. And so they just started yelling at me when we pulled into Santa Maria degli Angeli, because I'm thinking I'm going to Assisi. And then they just started pointing, So that's where I jumped off. And as soon as I got off the train, I took off my collar and I took my arm out of the sling. I put it in a wastebasket right there. like I said, it wasn't the smartest thing to do, but that's what I did. And
Why?
why did I do it? I just knew I would be somehow healed. I was never healed physically, really. I still have pain. Matter of fact, I have a pain appointment this Wednesday coming up. But emotionally, interiorly, I was healed. I don't know if that makes any sense. Um, I never had to wear a sling anymore. I would say yes, I was mostly healed physically, but I was more healed in myself, my peace. Uh, when I got to Assisi, I knew where I was. I never needed a street map. I just kind of knew the town. I was working in a bed and breakfast, if you want to think of it that way. But I couldn't really work because of my arm. And so the people, I don't want to name who they were a little disappointed in this summer help that they were supposed to be getting from America. And I really couldn't do. They wanted me to peel potatoes and stuff like that. Well, I couldn't use my right hand. So they made me the porter when the nuns would eat. Then I was to answer the door at the guest house because I spoke English and a lot of the guests were Americans. And they didn't speak English that well. So in that way, it worked out. And that's when I met Father Murray. I was there answering the door one day, and I opened the door, and there's Murray. And I said, "Hey, I know you. You're Murray Bodo." And he said, "Well, how do you know me?" And I said, "I read your book." And I had written a couple of songs for that book and things like that. And we just became fast friends. And he was there with a group of Franciscans who were leading a pilgrimage. Father Damien, Father Aaron, and Father Murray had some of them were priests, some of them were friars, and there were a few other, there was a small group, maybe 8 or 9 people. And they could see that I was pretty sick. I was getting physically sick there. I wasn't allowed out of the guest house except to go to Mass at 5 o'clock at night, run down to the cathedral, which was all the way across Assisi, and come back. And so they sort of adopted me into their pilgrimage group, and they started to take me with them when they traveled. And just all around. They took me to San Damiano's. They took me up to Laverna. They to the Carcery. Places I would have never been able to get to or get into. Cella de Cortona, which was interesting because they started calling me Brother Susie. And when we went to Cella de Cortona, Father Damien, who was the leader of the group, Damien Isabel, he's in the Congo now. He could speak, I don't know how many languages. I never heard anyone converse at a table in Swahili, French, Italian, English, all at one conversation. He is an amazing, amazing man. But when we got to Cella de Cortona, he just told me to be quiet and stand close to him. So he put his hand on my shoulder, and I was standing close to him. He had his habit on, and he got in an argument with the porter there, because they were a little bit of a heated exchange. And Damien kept saying, no, Frate Susie. And he just kind of kept pushing me and walking me with him. And all of a sudden I was in Francis's cell, in which I'm sure no woman had been in 700-800 years, but those kind of experiences, started to happen. And then,
yeah. Can we go back real quick? For a lot of people listening, they're going to be wondering, why in the world would a college student who's in the middle of healing from a really serious injury, who just lost her father not long before, who just picked up this book, Journey in the Dream, not too long before as well. Why in the world would she try to go to Assisi with $100 in her pocket? Like, what was it about that book or the call of the Franciscan message? Or maybe it's some other kind of gravitational pull. Like, what was it that got you on that what most people would consider a crazy journey?
Oh, it was crazy, all right. And I was called crazy many times, but I didn't know that Francis had been kept in a subterranean cell, and that there was a part of his life where he kind of lost it too, and his parents were upset with him, and he had struggled with all the, you always see St. Francis with the birds on his shoulder, and he's out in a garden. And, I didn't know that he had gone through all of that personal struggle inside. And I thought, I can talk to him. No, I can talk to him. I know I will get some answers. I had to know why. I just had to get some answers. And I knew, somehow I just knew. And in Murray's book was where I read those first stories. That whole Francis, the Journey and the Dream is all about that, the journey and then the dream, and so I was like, okay, I'm going on that journey, and I need the answers for my dream, because I the turmoil inside of me had to be calmed, and it was when I was in Assisi.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Do you feel like you got your answer, or what was it that you received in Assisi on that first pilgrimage there that kind of propelled you forward in your life with everything that you were dealing with at that time?
Validation, if that makes any sense. I suddenly felt when I was there that I was okay. It was okay to be me. It was all right to be able to talk to Francis in the way I would go to San Damiano's, and I would just sit there in silence, but I felt completely joyful and peaceful. I'd look at the San Damiano crucifix, and I just felt like I was all right. I wasn't some mixed up, troubled, nutty college student. It was okay to have all these issues. And of course, I wrote a lot when I was there. I kept a journal. I just melded into that whole Franciscan journey. It was like every step of the way, I started to realize that I was meeting these angels, this people from the other, not people from the other side. I don't mean it like that, but I was not alone. Someone was always, like the woman on the train, the priest in Luxembourg, Father Murray, Father Damien, that all along the journey there were people that I didn't even know coming in to be with me and walk with me and let me know that it was all okay, if that makes any sense. And of course, Francis, I would just sit at his house. I would usually go in the evening down by where his childhood home was. And I'd go to the basilica and sit down by his tomb, and Lady Jacobo's tomb. I was just being in Assisi. And then I left the guest house where I was, and Father Damien and Father Murray moved me over, got me into another situation where I was part of this fully Italian house where the Bishop of Assisi lived, and Donaldo Brunacci, who was in the Assisi Underground, the movie The Assisi Underground. He was one of the people that helped during the Nazi occupation, very famous man. But anyway, then again, I was in a situation where they just accepted me into their family, and I didn't know half of what they were saying, but none of them spoke English, but they'd play cards with me at night and they'd all laugh. It was just a joyous time. And Donaldo would take me up on the mountain with his dog, and he took me to some of Francis's other caves other than up at the Carchery. And I don't know, the bishop
Yeah.
would ask me the same question you asked me: what on earth are you doing? No, he did. He, you know, why are you here? What are you looking for? And you know,
Yeah, it's very interesting to me hearing your journey, Susan, and thank you again for sharing it. I think it's going to be very relatable to a lot of people listening. But it's interesting to me how many moments on the spiritual journey you were searching for that feeling that you explained at the very beginning, like you just didn't want to feel alone anymore. And time again, someone shows up, like the person on the train, Father Murray. I
yeah,
mean, that in itself is crazy.
yeah,
You read this book that has a huge impact on your life, and then you go halfway around the world with $100 in your pocket, and
yeah,
a kind person tells you in the train station, you can't be here, this is too dangerous.
yeah,
You end up in Assisi meeting Father Murray, this person who's impacted you through his words on a page. And I mean, it's just like time and time again, you're reminded that however often you may feel alone, you're not alone.
yes, yes. Now, I think when you're younger, that fearlessness, and as a new Christian, if you want to think of it that way, as you get older and life kind of piles more things on, uh, I'm probably not as brave, you know, but I still have that sense that I'm not alone. Um, I get more afraid now, I think, just because I'm older, more vulnerable, and I still try to. That's what I always hold on to. That I'm not alone. All I have to do is wait, and someone or something will help me. I got lost once in Bath, England. I wanted to go to the Roman baths, and I was walking back, and I got incredibly lost, and no one was around, and I really didn't know how to get back to where I was staying. And I don't know why I was in a section where there were no people. There was no one on the streets, and all of a sudden around the corner just comes this woman, and she asked me, "Are you lost?" She didn't know I was lost. And then she walked me a couple blocks and got me on the right path. And the same thing happened once when I spoke at the Vatican. I was lost in a different way. Of course, it's very intimidating to speak at the Vatican, uh, and I didn't know what to talk about. I had two different um, presentations. One was more academic because by this point I had gotten my doctorate, and the other one was more personal. And I was coming down, and I did not know which one I was going to say or present. And I'm coming down the steps to this room. There was 100 people from all over the world in this like a lecture hall, and I still don't know what I'm going to say. Uh, and this priest, just came over to me. There's all kinds of people, swarming around, and I don't know who he was. I never saw him before. I never saw him since. He just walked up to me, gave me a big hug, and said, "Give them the one of your personal journey. That's the one they need to hear." And he just kind of pushed me back, looked straight in my eyes, smiled, and walked into the crowd. I mean, I don't know. So that's the one I gave.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, what would you say to someone listening? I think a lot of people feel alone today, what would you say to them? You've kind of relived this really important part of your own spiritual journey in this conversation. What kind of, I'm not a fan of the word advice, but what would you, if they were open to hearing what you have to say, what would you say?
That's a tough one because I think there are a lot of people alone today. I know when Mother Teresa came to Cincinnati, one of the friars there asked her to come, and she did come. And I was there taking pictures because I used to work as a photojournalist. And she said that she had, of all the countries of the world, the country she felt the most loneliness in was the United States. And that really struck me because I think there are so many people, including myself, you end up alone or they end up in hospice. I'm talking now, I'll go straight to the elderly because I just took care of my mom for the last 7 years of her life. And she kept asking this question, where is everybody? And it haunted me too, because is that what she kept experiencing in her mind? Where is everybody? She was one of 10 children, and even she felt that way. But I would hope that people who feel alone can find some kind of spiritual solace. And if that's not enough, and it isn't for some people, I don't think they need the physical solace too, or getting, certainly if I don't have an animal around me, I feel even more alone. That feeling of, it's not like I feel like incredibly fine. I'm not alone. It's more like I know there's something there. I never feel like that is absent, but I don't always feel totally attached, if you know what I mean. And trying on a daily basis to keep that attachment is something we can all do if we meditate. And but joining a group, a prayer group, but I don't know. I mean, it's a great question. I don't think I've answered it very well. It's an answer that I still search for sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's a hard question.
Well, one of my, as you were talking, I thought of one of my favorite philosophers, a guy named Peter Rollins, Irish guy. He talks about, he does kind of a play on words with the words all one. He says you can't spell all one without alone. And in that, I mean, you could interpret that all kinds of different ways. But for me personally, it makes me think about how it's almost as if emptiness and oneness both collide somewhere. Like it is terrifying and is out of control or disoriented or dizzied as I sometimes feel when I'm overwhelmed with that feeling of aloneness, that maybe if I'm open to it, there's an all oneness there as well. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I think I do. I mean, I can understand what you're saying, and I love the phrase. I'll have to think about that one myself, right? But I know that the darkness wants us to feel alone. They want us to feel isolated. That's kind of the goal, and so we have to try to stay connected to friends, to people, to animals, to, I'm not sure if, whatever is happening in people's churches, but I'm not necessarily going down that route, but make the effort. I text people, my friends, all the time. I'm always saying, hi, how are you? And I've had some members of my family or friends. I take a lot of pictures at the beach in the morning of whatever I see, and then I'll send them to different friends. And then I get a response from them, and I just know it's a way that they appreciate the picture. I appreciate hearing from them. It's a great way to start the day. And they don't feel alone. I'm usually sending them to other friends who I know live alone. There's a lot of women who live alone, but I also have some male friends who they have all the money they could ever want, but they're alone. They never ended up getting married or having families. And then I know some people who have had families who still feel alone sometimes because the families get fragmented. I think there has to be an effort from your side to connect and wait and hope, like I said about the woman who just walked around the corner, knowing that there will be that touch somehow. You have to have that faith that it's there. You haven't gotten to it yet, maybe, but it's there. I also try to segment my life into a day. It's just today I have to live through. I know somewhere today I will feel that touch. I know it. I have to wait for it.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Susan. Thank you. Thanks for sharing your story. I find, and I found your writing to be really beautiful and inspiring. But just hearing your story, I mean, such your courage to go on that journey, and it's what you just said, your openness to waiting through the discomfort, through these times where people or forces or experiences showed up for you in a unique way. Yeah, I find all of that really inspiring. So I have one question left, if you don't mind. You just shared with us your journey to meeting Father Murray for the first time and everything that took you to Assisi for the first time. Here's your book that you did decades later with Father Murray.
Yeah.
What's it like for you to reflect upon that this man who welcomed you in at this very interesting time in your life, to say the least, now you're doing a book with him? What's that like for you? What kind of stirs within your heart as I say that?
Well, I always tell people that you might not be able to see your guardian angel, but I can see mine. I know it's Murray Bodo. I believe that. We've been friends since the moment we met. He lives in Cincinnati. I'm in Florida, but we've always been close in a spiritual sense. He has a beautiful voice. I didn't know if you've ever heard him sing, but when I first was recording songs, we made those cassette tapes together, and he would sing some of the songs on the cassette tapes. And to look back on the life that we had together, if you want to think of it that way, spiritually and as writers. I mean, he has a PhD in comparative literature. Mine is in kinesiology and sport history. Very different paths, but I look at sport history and the beauty of the body as creaturehood. It always goes back to my association with being a creature and that Franciscan charism of Francis, and the handedness and footedness and being part of God's creation. And so Murray and I have always related on, and when I would have a question about Francis, I would go to Father Murray and ask if he's a walking encyclopedia. But to look back on writing the book, he wanted to look back on his journey over his lifetime. He's 87 now. And he asked me if I would look back because he knows the steps in my journey. Would you look back? He asked me for over your 47 years when you first met Francis as a college student. And I said, sure. Are you kidding? I'd be happy to, So it's an honor to ever be able to do anything with Murray. He's like pure water. I don't know if that makes you look in his eyes, and his eyes are clear. He's just so wise and funny. That's all clear water is the best description for Father Murray. I think Just a
That really
trick.
is. That's the best description I've heard too.
That-
That's great. Yeah. Well, thank you, Susan. Yeah, this has been a real joy. I wanted to ask you about sport and spirituality, but maybe we'll save that for another podcast. I think this was hearing about your own journey into Franciscan spirituality and through all these different moments in your life where the aloneness, your openness in the aloneness to being comforted in some way. I think it's going to be really relatable and inspiring to people listening. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Stephen.
Once again, that was Susan Saint Singh. Susan's new book, God's Love Song with Father Murray Bodo, is available in the Franciscan Media Store at shop.franciscanmedia.org. Huge thanks to our sponsor, the Franciscan School of Theology, and to Susan for joining us on Off the Page. Hearing her story and wisdom, it was truly such a gift to me, and I hope it was to you as well. Thank you, as always, to you, our listeners, for tuning in and supporting this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review or sharing it with your friends or family. And lastly, thanks to Cyprian Concilio for providing the music for this episode. This is Stephen Copeland signing off. Peace and all good.
I will lead you into the desert with me and tenderly speak